In this portion, we'll discuss Chapter 1. We're reviewing a little bit that we had covered. Specifically, we're going to talk about how researchers have looked at what managers do. In a previous lecture, we talked about the pyramid of management, and I'll open that up in the portal. It's quite small. But the point here is for students to see that management, the numbers decrease as they move up in management within the organization. We have first line managers, middle managers, and top managers. There's also a group of individuals that are supervised by the first line managers. We call them non-managerial employees. We also call them operatives, O-P-E-R-A-T-I-V-E-S, operatives. And these are individuals that do not oversee other employees. They do not have management responsibilities for it. Now, we also looked at a pie chart. We were introduced to Fowl's four functions: planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. I should note that they don't have any specific order that they are stated. A lot of people put the P-O-L-C. I don't know if they pronounce it Pollock, just to memorize. But the idea is that not only these arrows go in one direction, they go in the opposite direction too. These are four functions that at any time a manager will be working through. Might be planning, might at some point be leading others, might be organizing tasks. Controlling would be that they are measuring their performance with their outcomes and their goals, and then at the same time back to planning. We also took these four functions and put into our pie chart. So we took the pyramid of management and the four functions, and we looked at what would happen if we looked at both of these concepts together. Would we see any patterns emerge? And the simple answer is yes. And the more complex answer is yes, but we don't really have I would call it a lookbook, a book that would identify these patterns throughout industries. So let me explain a little bit further. This diagram shows us that using the four functions, that first level managers might be spending a certain percentage of time on leading, a certain percentage on organizing, planning, and controlling. And as that manager becomes a middle level manager, their percentage of time on leading would decrease, and then yet it would decrease again at top level managers. And as we look at the other three functions, we would see similar patterns that the percentage of time spent on a specific function varies. Well, this is where the complexity comes. Not only if we look at first, middle, and top level managers and the percentage of time spent performing these functions, if we looked at profit and non-profit organizations, first, middle, and top level managers within these type organizations, we'd also see the difference between profit and non-profit. If we looked at different industries, possibly say the automobile manufacturing industry and retail setting, we see different times spent on these different functions. First level managers in manufacturing might spend more or less time on leading than a first level manager in a retail setting. So here lies the complexity. But we do see, though, within these different industries, or within profit or nonprofit status, or even within a new organization or organization that's been around for 20 or 30 years, that there would be some shifts between the time spent between their first level and mid-level and top level managers. We continue to say, well, maybe functions is not the best way to answer a question of what do managers do when they are at work. So Mintzberg also has a different take on how to describe what managers do. And in Mintzberg, he uses roles. And with a lot of theorists, what they do is that they observe different roles or activities that managers are using throughout their day, and then they categorize these roles in a simpler form. So over here on the left-hand side, we see that we have interpersonal, informational, and decisional roles, and then some examples of what would be classified interpersonal: figurehead, leader, and liaison. Let's just take this category right here. And this is typically a test question I have for this category within Mintzberg. So a figurehead, we see these ceremonial and symbolic duties. I always kind of joke and say this might be the queen. She's serving this role at times when she's in her carriage and waving to the population. She's the figurehead of monarchy. And then we would see maybe a leader role, direct and motivate subordinates, training and counseling and communicating with their subordinates for it. But there's also this role of a liaison. And a liaison maintains information links. This is key, the word links, both inside and outside the organization. So they can go to meetings and they bring information from their organization to the meeting to share with other individuals from different organizations who are going to share information with them, and thus they return to their organization with that information and share it back. And so the goal is to maintain this bridge, this link between the organization they work for and other organizations within the community. Let's jump down here on informational, because this is where I think a lot of confusion comes between someone who's a liaison, someone who's a figurehead, and then someone who's acting in the role of a spokesperson. In a spokesperson's role, they are transmitting information to the outside. So I might be a public relations officer within an organization, and my goal is to give a press release and to give the public information about my organization. I'm not gathering information from other entities and bringing it back into my organization, such as a liaison would do. And I'm not just standing there greeting visitors. I do have a purpose, and it's to distribute information. So I'm not acting as a figurehead. So as we can see, although some may interchange these roles, they are significantly different. And a lot of times I focus on the difference between that liaison and the spokesperson, and use terms such as, if your job is to continue relationships, to build bridges, to make connections, you are a liaison. Versus if your job is just to transmit information, you are acting then as a spokesperson. Let's take a look at the third way that we can learn about what managers do, and that would be looking at Katz's skills. Katz he was familiar with Mintz's roles and Fowl's functions, and thought that maybe we should look at what individuals possess. And he comes up with 4 categories of skills. Those are conceptual, those interpersonal, technical, and political. And when I talk about this in exams, basically when we look at conceptual, it's to look over these complex situations. You're looking at many variables at a time. Versus if you're looking at a technical, this would be something that you are looking at a specific project or a specific manufacturing line or a specific addition to a process. It could be something such as, in a technical, you are looking at whether a new cardboard box would be good to put your product in. You've learned that maybe it might be more efficient for your machinery and also better for the environment. This would be job-specific technical knowledge to determine whether this new initiative would work within your organization. In a complex situation, you definitely would be looking for something larger. You might be looking to see how the recent economic trends might affect the customer buying patterns for your specific projects, your specific products for it. And interpersonal is what is probably we're most familiar with is those relationships and working well with others, not only on a one-to-one individual, but also in groups. And then the political is later in our study in this class, is building power bases, establishing networks and the right connections. And I always tell people, just keep in mind is that you may not be in a formal position of power, such as a mid-level manager, or even a first level manager. But you have informal power where people will work for you because they appreciate you. And so we'll learn later about these differences between formal and informal. So why is this important? Well, one thing I asked our students to do is to look at this concept introduced called the Peter Principle. And the idea that Dutch brings to us is that employees can be promoted to their level of incompetence. Why does this occur? Well, a lot of times we look at performance reviews on their current job. And if an employee is outstanding, we say, gosh, you do so well in your non-managerial position. We're going to promote you to our first line management. And what happens is that they quickly realize there are a lot of skills, or we want to use roles, or maybe a percent of functions that they did in their current job is different in this new level, this new job. Sometimes, if we look back at our pie chart, this will help us. We have a first level manager who is doing outstanding and is now promoted to a mid-level manager. The things that they love to do was leading, and now they're doing less of that. And maybe their weakness was in the area of organizing, and now they're doing significantly more organizing. What we find is that they're incompetent in their new job. And if the individual recognizes this dissonance, a dissonance is between existing and a place you want to be or need to be, this gap or dissonance that occurs. Maybe the employee can take some training or do some self-development. But frequently, this is the employee's not aware and is just frustrated that they're not performing at that level. And even so, maybe their top-level managers are now frustrated with their newly hired or promoted mid-level manager. They're not performing at the level that they were performing when they were a first-level manager. And this makes this a difficult situation. Hopefully the employee will recognize this dissonance, this gap, and seek out some assistance. But maybe that employee doesn't want to tell their manager, hey, guess what? I'm really not good in this. You just promoted me and I'm not good at this task. That might be kind of embarrassing for that employee. So sometimes they try to fake it till they make it, maybe kind of hopefully that their skills or roles or abilities will catch up. Or worst case scenario, they leave the organization because they do not have a safety net. They do not have an ability to receive that training. And thus what happens is that they need to go to a competitor. Now they know what type of roles or skills or functions they'll be performing in this new job, and they will seek assistance and help them be better performers by more knowledge. So can it be tested? Yes, it has. And what happens, I asked you to read this article about looking to see if this really does play out. Sometimes we have theories and we think, okay, theoretical, this should work, but does it play out in the real setting? And what we find here is that the answer is yes. Investigating the principle, we find that that sales performance is highly correlated with those who are promoted to management. Those who have the highest sales typically are looked at as the potential for that managerial position. But what we find out is that sales performance is actually negatively correlated with performance as a sales manager. Now think about this. What makes you good at sales? What roles or skills or what percent of time you're spending in the 4 functions? Do we know that maybe that's going to change when you step into management? And if you're moving from first level manager to second level manager, won't those percentage of time spent on functions or roles or skills also change? We know that to be the case. And so why in our chapter we have the diagram of the function pie charts using Vahul's 4 functions, we can safely assume that if we took the levels of management and we applied Mintzberg's roles or Katz's skills, we would also find some shifts in the percentage of time that we spend on roles, skills, and functions, varying not only in the levels of management, but also from a non-managerial position to a level of management. But let's make it even more complex, and throughout our industries and throughout our different characteristics of organizations, such as profit or nonprofit, or an organization that's been around for 5 months or 5 years. It is a complex job, but I think you know a little bit more, and hopefully when you decide to take a job, you might stop and think, what is needed in that next role and make sure that you're ready to perform.